Testing 1 2. Testing. Testing.
Good afternoon, everybody. I call the House Legislative Branch Subcommittee back to order. We were in this morning at 10 a.m. for a hearing with the Government Publishing Office. And this afternoon, we have a real treat. We have the Architect of the Capitol. Today, I'd like to welcome Stephen Ayers, the 11th Architect of the Capitol. We will hear testimony regarding the Architect of the Capitol's fiscal year 2019 budget. Since he last appeared before this subcommittee, the AOC has made significant progress with several initiatives. They include preservation products across the campus at the Capitol, Supreme Court, Russell Senate Office Building, and Botanical Garden. Additionally, work on the west wing of the Cannon House Office Building is more than 50% complete, with a goal of 100% completion by this year's congressional transition. Furthermore, conservation of the Capitol's Brumidi corridors was completed. Look forward to hearing about these projects. These projects, along with several others, were done by the AOC while also maintaining its day-to-day services and operations, which include welcoming over 3 million visitors to the Capitol Visitor Center and the Botanical Garden. It is safe to say the AOC had a busy year, and I commend the organization for its hard work. The larger ongoing multi-phase projects included in this request are the Cannon House Office Building Renewal, which is a $752.7 million project, of which $62 million is included in this year's request. Also included is a request for $32.7 million for the final phase of the Rayburn Interior Garage Rehabilitation Project, a project that will total $131 million. And finally, in the request is $22.6 million for cooling tower renovations at the Capitol Power Plant, with that project's total cost estimated at $232.6 million. Over the last year, I've had the opportunity to learn more about these projects and appreciate the site visits the AOC has hosted. Anytime I get to wear a hard hat, that's a good time. Mr. Ayers, I look forward to continuing to work with you and your team as the subcommittee puts together the fiscal year 2019 legislative branch appropriation bill. So welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Yoder.
At this point, I would like to yield to my good friend and decent human being, the Honorable Tim Ryan.
This is getting worse. I remember the earlier hearing, I was a gentleman and a scholar. Now I'm decent.
Just decent.
I appreciate that.
A real decent human being.
Clawing my way to middle management here.
The gentleman and scholar, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you,
from Ohio.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate your time and effort. We've had some great tours, and we know that the omnibus we just passed, you received $712 million. 15% increase over fiscal year 2017, and in your request for fiscal year 19, you asked for $720.2 million, which is a 1.1% increase. Your budget's heavily project-based, so your requests can go up or down depending on what work happens to be needed in a particular year. But even taking that into account, the increase you're requesting today is fairly modest. I hope we can get you the resources you need for 2019. And of the project dollars you're requesting, I noticed that 49% of it is classified as deferred maintenance, meaning around half of the work is just to catch up with the needs of our buildings and infrastructure that's past the end of its useful life. And I think that's very telling. And it's a good indication of how we've approached investments in our country generally under sequestration. I'm pleased that with the budget caps deal we struck earlier this year, we're starting to dig ourselves out of that hole. And your organization's responsibilities are extremely far-ranging, from security infrastructure to daycare centers to power plants and gardens. And we have a lot to talk about, so I'll save the rest of my comments for the round of questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your scholarly leadership. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ayers, your complete statement will be made part of the record, but feel free to summarize your remarks for the committee at this time.
Thank you, Chairman Yoder and Ranking Member Ryan and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to present the architect of the Capitol's budget request for fiscal year 2019. And first, I'd like to thank the subcommittee for your support of our needs in the fiscal year 2018 omnibus and the projects and initiatives that you were able to fund in that bill, I know will be important to our collective success moving forward. This funding will also assist our more than 2,100 talented employees with reducing the constraints that have been put upon them in recent years, impeding their ability to get their jobs done. And while we take pride in our mission to serve the Congress and the Supreme Court and preserve America's capital, as well as inspiring, memorable experiences for those that visit here, I'm pleased to tell you that I'm incredibly happy with our accomplishments over the last year. As the chairman noted, we successfully completed the conservation of the Capitol's Bermuda corridors this year. Several major projects across the campus reached milestones, including the Stone Preservation Project at the United States Capitol, the United States Supreme Court, the Russell Senate Office Building, and the United States Botanic Garden Conservatory. Also, the major equipment needed for the cogeneration system at the Capitol Power Plant has been installed and testing is underway. And I know at least you two will be interested to know we're going to have a first fire of that piece of equipment in the next 2 weeks, we think. So that'll be a fun event for us, and we look forward to celebrating that. Unfortunately, our annual costs continue to rise, and our work is often backlogged, and our request of $750 million represents what we think are the resources we need to support our infrastructure and fulfill our mission day to day. Our ability to retain sufficient people to keep up with increased security demands is important. Reducing our risk of infrastructure failures that lead to larger and more costly repairs is equally as essential. Additionally, with annual visitation growing by 12.5% last year, another 8% this year, trending on top of that 12% increase last year, resources and people are needed to continue to provide first-rate customer service, first-rate visitor engagement to your constituents. We must bolster our common central services that improve our agency effectiveness and decrease the operating costs for all of our jurisdictions represented behind me. These services include the AOC's specialized construction, project management, historic preservation, cybersecurity, safety, information technology, support functions, just to name a few. And adequate funding for these services is critical in the successful delivery of our construction projects each year. And so for 2019, our agency's risk-based prioritization process identified $173 million of projects that are primed and ready for 2019 funding. Of this, about 49 million of them are requests for projects that were requested in 2018 but unable to be funded. This includes the North Exit Stair Improvement Project at the Library of Congress's Jefferson Building, which would address a citation that we've received from the Office of Compliance. In the House, we're seeking funding for the final phase of the 4-phase Rayburn Garage interior rehabilitation. We also continue to prioritize security upgrades across the Capitol campus with the ongoing effort to replace vehicle barriers and kiosks that have reached the end of their intended life. Additionally, for a third year, we're pursuing funding to begin the replacement of critical infrastructure at the Alternative Computer Facility in Virginia, which is an important component of maintaining reliable IT operations for the Congress. While to an untrained eye, our buildings look to be in great condition, but delays in our annual preventive maintenance initiatives and the continued phasing of some of our major projects are concerning to us. And so funding the needs as we've identified them in our 2019 budget will ensure that stakeholders and visitors to Capitol Hill experience the great grandeur of these historic treasures that we experience every day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thanks for your testimony, sir. A few quick questions to get us started. One on the, could brief us maybe on the Childcare Center. That's a project that we started the last year or so. You know, we've funded phase 1 and 2 of that project. Ultimately, that project will house 232 children, up from the current amount of 70, which of course there's a long wait list. We all know on Capitol Hill, the old joke is you have to register your child before you're even married or before you're even pregnant. And so we're hoping to alleviate some of that backlog, make the Capitol a more family-friendly place, allowing working parents to continue to work here with convenient and affordable childcare. So is everything still on track for construction to be completed by November 15th of this year with an opening in January of 19?
Correct. We are scheduled mid-November to be complete, and that leaves 6 weeks for the House Chief Administrative Officer to outfit it with furniture and supplies and to do some training with the folks that will work there. So we're working towards that date. Obviously, this is a pretty high-risk project for us. You know, we developed a cost estimate and provided that $15 million estimate before we had design documents even started. So we're putting forth a great deal of effort to manage it day to day, to keep costs under control. We're pretty comfortable with that November date. We're a little less comfortable with the number, but we're working hard to keep costs as contained as we possibly can.
On time and under budget, I think is the motto over at the architect's office,
is,
right?
yes.
So
And we do a good
hope
job
we're
at that,
True to
don't
form
we?
on that in this project. So this will be phase 1, correct? And then phase 2 would open up about a year later?
That's correct.
Okay. And all resources for that project have been appropriated at this point?
That's correct,
In
yes.
terms of what we budgeted?
Yes.
Hopefully we live under that. Okay. Let's turn to the Cannon House office project for a second. To date, $502.9 million of that projected budget of $752.7 million has been provided. For fiscal year, you're requesting $62 million more in no-year funds for the project. How much is AOC already obligated for the project to date out of the $502 million, I guess, that we have provided? Why is 62 the number? Can you kind of work through the math on when that would be needed? What amount of prior year funding is still currently available for the AOC's use on the project? And is the project on track to be completed on time in its projected $753 million budget?
Well, first, thank you for that extra little bit of money. It is 752 point something, so that's a few extra $100,000. I do appreciate you rounding up. We appreciate that. That project continues to be running incredibly smoothly for us. It is on time. We are under budget. We're coming up this November on an important milestone, and we'll begin the Phase 1 move back in and the Phase 2 move outs. We'll start that, of course, on December 1st, and all of that will happen during the month of December. You mentioned we do have $502 million appropriated for that, with another about $250 million yet to go to finish that project. And so we've mapped out what's the minimum amount of funding we need to have each year in the appropriation cycle to enable us to award each phase on time. And that turns out to be $62 million. And so it's important that we appropriate that every single year through the end of this project, and that will enable us to finish it on Phase 4 in 2024.
So your plan would be a $62 million request for 4 more years?
Correct.
Okay, each year $62 million to get to your
Yes.
roughly $250 million in
Yes.
additional resources necessary.
Yes.
Got it. And what's the entire project will be completed in 2024?
It is 2024.
Okay, and for those who are in Cannon, members who ask us, so Phase 1, what areas is that will be reopening? So some of the 5th floor?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. So the entire west wing is under construction now. All of that will open back up from the rotunda and caucus room, the entire west wing. With
Rotunda will be back open.
brand new 5th floor. All of that will open up in January. Well, it will open up in December as
Right,
we'll
for
move members
members
back
moving in
in,
January.
and the north wing along Independence Avenue is Phase 2. All of that will move out in December.
Got it.
And so for the folks that are moving back in, we've identified 21 members, I think, that are eligible to move back into Phase 1 on the New Jersey Avenue side. We've been in touch with them. About a dozen of them have expressed interest to move back in, so we're working with them now, and they have return rights to their previous suite.
Oh, they do? So you
do.
can go back to your suite that you had before you were moved out in the
If
in the
you
phases.
were in that suite for the full 114th Congress, you do have return rights to that suite.
Okay,
There are 21 of those, and 12 have expressed interest so far.
okay. Well, look forward to taking a tour later this year and getting an idea of how the progress is coming.
Great.
Okay, Mr. Ryan?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just say thank you for all your work on the child care. I think other than food, we hear most about the challenges for our staff with regard to child care. So this has been a huge priority for those of us on this committee. And I know the chairman talked to you a little bit about that. Can you talk to us a little bit about the parking? I know there's some unresolved issues there. And when we've toured it a couple times we've been down there, that's my concern too, getting people in and out of there and what the parking looks like. So if you could maybe share a little bit about where your head is on that.
I think I'd be happy to. I think the decision point was whether we drop off and pick up on C Street or D Street, and we've made the decision that D Street is the most important or the best place to drop off. So we'll be dropping off and picking up for the Childcare Center on D Street, and we think taking both sides of that street for parking is appropriate. Today there are 36 at least parallel parking slots along that street. And so we've hired a consultant to help us design what interventions we need in that street, improve crosswalks, traffic calming and slowing devices in the street, perhaps some curb bump outs, maybe slanted parking, through the design process, we'll figure that out and incorporate that into the project.
And everybody's going to be coming in at the same time, obviously, or right around the same window. What negative impacts do you see in the blocks around that? That's a pretty active area in the morning. How bad is it going to be?
Yeah, well, I certainly can't sit here and tell you there's not going to be any impact with 232 children in there. That's potentially 232 drop-offs and pickups. It may not be that many, but potentially that many. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to set up a process whereby we can get them in and out fast so that each drop-off is a pretty quick turnaround.
And hope the dads aren't dropping off because we forget stuff all the time and gotta put the hazards on and get out of it. It's a mess. But anyway, I'm having a little therapy session here. The other issue was the green buildings. We've got a lot of money, a lot of construction, a lot of renovation. Can you share with us what you're doing with regard to using the latest technologies, solar panels being a more obvious example of what we're able to do to save money in the long run? We talk about these upfront costs, but saving the taxpayer money in the long run. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. You know, the Energy Independence and Security Act required us to reduce our energy intensity by 30%, and we achieved that goal in 2015, which was the end of that legislation. That same year, we established a new goal for ourselves, thinking that we could get another 20% out of our inventory of buildings. So we think 10 years from then, in 2025, we'll be able to reach a 50% reduction in our energy intensity. To get to the 30% in 2015, the biggest thing we did were the 3 ESPCs, Energy Savings Performance Contracts. And that's where private investment came in, investors and private contractors renovated the House office buildings, the Capitol, and the Senate with nearly $100 million of investments. And we pay that back through proven energy savings. And that really is the biggest thing that enabled us to reach that 30% goal. The 20% more, the 2 biggest things that are going to be most important there are the cogeneration system at the Capitol Power Plant. When that comes online here in 2 weeks or so, we're going to save significant energy by that. And the 3 energy savings and performance contracts were so successful for us, we decided to do a 4th one at the Library of Congress buildings. And we've modeled that, and that's going to save considerable energy for us as well. The rest is some behavioral changes that we think our building occupants can make, some technology improvements by changing some of our mechanical systems from pneumatically controlled to electronically, digitally controlled. Those kinds of investments we think are necessary, but we're pretty confident that we're going to be able to get 50% out of our buildings by 2025.
Fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Taylor?
Just have a couple questions. You answered a few. Thank you. Appreciate it. On cybersecurity systems, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can you explain what the standard service are to help monitor or have you changed any of the monitoring of the daily cyber attacks? I know that last time we had a meeting, we have a ton of them that are coming in. Have you seen an uptick in them, and are there any new emerging threats? Is this the reason that you guys asked for increased funding to harden the network systems?
Thank you, Congressman Taylor. The Congress put together a legislative branch cybersecurity working group, and coming out of that group were a series of recommendations for all of the agencies in the ledge branch to put forth, and we've requested money in our budget, $1.8 million, to accommodate some of those improvements and some of those hardening initiatives. Prior to that, for us today, our steady state today is we feel pretty comfortable with our cybersecurity posture. We certainly haven't seen any significant attacks on any of the architect of the Capitol's systems. We routinely test our system through penetration testing. We do phishing testing with our employees, and people are doing a pretty good job at it. We're not overly concerned about our systems today, but recognize there are some things that we could do to continue to harden them.
Can you speak to the language for the transfer authority of the AOC of Office of Security Programs? Why the request and the justification of it?
Yes, thank you. Over the last several years, we've had a number of security projects requests in our budget, and requests that we're simply not able to fund. We don't have the bandwidth to fund them. But some of our customers come to us with money. And so and we're able to accommodate that if they can pay for a variety of projects. And so this legislation would enable us to easily transfer money from the Capitol Police to us to do a security project they want to do, or from the House or Senate Sergeant at Arms to us to execute a security project that they want to do. It's very cumbersome for us to do that now, transfer that money. It actually takes 5 or 6 transfers of the money before it gets to us to enable us to do it. So it's simply reducing some of the bureaucracy, enabling us to take money from other agencies to execute their work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Ms. McCollum.
Hey, Mr. Chair, and I just want to again commend all the workmanship, all the work that you did on outside of the United States Capitol. People who are returning here after maybe seeing all the scaffolding or not being here for 15 or 20 years are just constantly in awe of the way that the building looks. So
Thank you.
I just think we have to remember in making these investments, which was the right thing to do structurally for the building, but also enhances our national treasure and our face forward to our constituents and visitors from all over the world. In talking about green buildings, I have 2 kind of small things to kind of bring up, but at the same time, we kind of sometimes function as a city council for a lot of the people that we work with, both staff and members. You mentioned temperature control, and I'll put these 2 issues together. It is so cold in our office in Rayburn at times. I have staff wearing jackets, using blankets. They've brought in heating pads, and I've been known to wear gloves sitting at my desk. So I hope when you're looking at the temperature control that if someone can get back to us kind of what's going on. We're not the only office that talks about this in the elevator. Then the other thing for green, people still haven't figured out how to recycle yet, right? Even some of the younger generation that grew up with all the commercials and that on there. So you went through a big push in recycling. At the same time, the recycling in the offices, all the smaller bins were replaced with bigger bins. I have limited office and traffic space. I've been trying to actually get people, you'd be happy with me, Mr. Ryan, to get up from their desk on occasion from sitting all day and walk over and recycle something or to throw something out rather than have all the maintenance and the collection on that. Could you kind of explain to me, I understand what you're trying to do with recycling, and I want you to know I really appreciate it, but what prompted this change and what kind of expertise or help did you have? Because I don't know if you consulted any members and staff on it. If you could answer those 2, and then, Mr. Chair, I have 2 other small items.
I'd be happy to. Sorry to hear you're cold in your office, and we'll work to take care of that. And it's indicative of old buildings where we are simply unable to control the mechanical systems in the building. It was the exact same way in the Cannon building. And we're really looking forward to the reduced number of service calls that we get, sending out technicians to make adjustments once the Cannon building comes back online. But we will certainly look into yours and see if we can remedy that. I think the good news, you know, the big picture for me in the recycling program is that our goal this year was to recycle 40% of office waste coming out of members' offices across the Capitol campus. And we actually achieved 44% recycling rate, despite changing containers and other things. And we also had a recycling rate of 90 or 91% of construction debris, and we achieved 93% this year. And our new goal moving forward is to bump up our recycling rate, I think, to about 50% for office wastes. The rest of that, all of that is a landfill diversion technique. The rest of that waste that's not recycled goes to a waste-to-energy facility that's burned and turned into energy. So that's the big picture. I must admit, I'm not exactly familiar with the recycling program in your office and why we
Well,
changed.
it's in all of our offices.
Why we changed the bins in the House of Representatives, I mean, from one size bin to a different size bin, but I will figure all of that out, and we'll come talk to you about
Well,
that.
we're not looking to, I saw one of my colleagues shaking her head when I was talking about, we're not looking to purchase anything new. I've just hung on to everything small that I can in my office, to the best of my.
Space is
So,
at such a premium in the House of Representatives, you're right.
So one question that I'm being asked a lot, and I know you have people working on it, is where the new part of the visitor center abuts the tunnel portion that goes into walking towards Longworth or Rayburn. There's a water issue and a problem with that. Is that just trying to meet new buildings with old buildings? Because I don't want to give misinformation out to anybody, and I said I would ask you.
Well, I think that tunnel is 60 or 70 years old, and it probably needs to be dug up and re-waterproofed. That's the big picture, and we're trying to hold on as long as possible without doing that, because that would dig up the road and the grounds between the Capitol and the Cannon/Longworth building. It's old and it leaks, and we're using some techniques to try to stave off that leaking from inside. So we'll find the cracks that are leaking, and we'll inject products in those cracks to try to prevent it from leaking. I think we're going to get several more years out of it. It doesn't look that great, but I think it's better than digging it up at the moment.
And then, Mr. Chair, not so much a question for the architect of the Capitol, but Ms. Wasserman Schultz was present back a couple years ago when some of us made a suggestion. I'd asked the chair, while we have the architect of the Capitol here, to maybe speak to it. Members often return money from their accounts. It goes back into the U.S. Treasury. It does not go down to pay debt or deficit, as some members often think it does. And some of us had an idea at one time that the money that would be returned from members who didn't use all of their allotment go to the architect of the Capitol for the very thing of energy efficiency, having more funds available for making the Cannon project move along faster, or something that comes up with a security need, because those funds would be helpful not only, I think, to the architect, but speeding things up for members, and also for all our visitors and guests who are coming into our office. If we were to have, if this committee were to decide to work to have an account like that, you wouldn't necessarily know, sir, what it was going to be or how it could be used. It would be kind of like, as my grandmother would say, extra purse change. It'd be significant. But if you had something like that, do you have some projects would be shovel-ready or things ready to go that you could use it either for window emplacement, heating, air conditioning, cooling? Would something like that be of help to you to reduce energy costs and to speed up some of the repairs that you need to make?
There's no question about that, Ms. McCullum. And if you look in our budget, we have a list of recommended projects. We also have another list behind that of projects that are ready to execute, but we've deferred them because they just don't rise up in priority to the budget bandwidth we think is available. So we have projects in all categories that are shovel-ready and ultimately need to be done and need to be funded.
And it would save money in some respects. So, Mr. Chair, I know that that's us talking to our prospective caucuses and doing some member education, but I think what we would save in the long run would be saving taxpayers money in the long run by doing this and getting through the list. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. And Ms. McCollum, I note that in the architect's budget, they asked for $22 million for cooling tower renovations. We had money in the previous year's budget, and so maybe a better thermostat could go along with that or something with the,
Yes.
I don't know if I want to keep replacing these cooling towers if it's freezing out my
Well,
colleagues.
Mr. Chair,
here.
I'm from Minnesota, so when I tell you
You're
it's
used to
cold,
it.
it's cold.
All right, well, there you go. Mr. Mulinar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. My office is in the Cannon Building, and one of the questions I get periodically is, I know it was about a year ago that lead was discovered in the drinking water, and people ask, what's the status? Is that changing? Are there improvements? I've got to believe there's a cost at supplying water and dispensers and bottles right now, but is there a plan to improve the drinking water?
There is, and the Cannon project, the most important part about the Cannon building project is we're taking out all of the wiring, all of the ductwork, all of the piping, and everything that's behind the walls and in the mechanical rooms in that building gets completely replaced. So it's really a infrastructure upgrade to the building. And so as we turn over phase one, all of the piping and all of the ductwork and electrical systems, mechanical and plumbing systems will all be new. All of that will obviously be lead-free. And so if we make a decision to turn the water back on this west side, certainly all of that will be lead-free.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then this is just a thing I've noticed. I'm somewhat directionally challenged, so I rely on directions quite a bit when I'm walking around. And one of the things when you go into the elevators, and I'm in the Cannon building. If I go to a different building, the Rayburn building, sometimes I'm trying to figure out, okay, which level do I get off at? Which, some of those plates are very small where you're trying to figure out which button you're going to push. And I noticed there were some new plates that looked like they were larger font, and somebody's, trying to help improve the signage, I guess, on the elevators. Is that something you're working on? Because I got to believe if I'm, having trouble with that, visitors to the Capitol or people who are trying to find their way around the House office buildings have to be experiencing that as well.
I think that's a great observation, and as I'm sitting here thinking, I've noticed the same thing, but I haven't done anything about it. And obviously I should have, because that's at least two of us, and there's probably another 30 in the room that have experienced the same small, on those little plates by the elevator buttons.
Okay,
So we'll get to work on that.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ayers, nice to see you. I have some questions about the House Historic Building Revitalization Trust Fund. How much is in the trust fund at the moment?
There is $55 million in the trust fund at the moment.
And
Yes.
we're in the posture now where we're just continuing to bank funds. You're not drawing it down.
That's correct.
So you're continuing to put it in. Okay.
Yes.
So you have the $62 million that you are requesting each year until Cannon is finished. We at the moment have $55 million in the trust fund. And then Cannon will be done in 2024, you mentioned?
Yes.
And then is Longworth or Rayburn next?
Well, we haven't made that decision yet. And by the end of the Cannon building, I think we'll have about $115 to $120 million in the trust fund by the time we finish Cannon. And we've talked a little bit in the past about our modeling of what Longworth or Rayburn might cost us in the future. And so we've recently secured a consultant that's going to help us figure that out.
Figure out how much the projected cost of Longworth or Rayburn would be?
Well,
Or
they're
how
gonna-
much you would need in the trust fund to augment what we appropriate each year?
Yes, both of those, plus help us determine how we can best go about doing something like the Rayburn building. When we last looked at the Rayburn building, it was a several billion-dollar project. And so, we're not poised to do, nor is the Congress poised to fund a project like that. So we've got to find a different way to go about that project and break it down perhaps into smaller pieces or do different mechanical systems at a time, whether we do it horizontally by floors or whether we do it by wing. We need some help figuring that out.
So you are making the points that I would like to make, because regardless of any which way we figure it out, it's going to be extremely expensive.
Yes.
Rayburn is rated poor, Longworth is rated fair. Presumably, we would have to start on Rayburn first because it's deteriorating faster. And we don't want to end up in a situation like we had in Cannon, where you have lead in the drinking water, or any other issues like that. So, Mr. Chairman, when we initially envisioned and created the Historic Buildings Revitalization Trust Fund, the idea was that we would put $30 to $70 million in each year. We have been banking with $17 million in 2010. We dropped it, 17 million in 17. We dropped it to 10 in 2018. Over 10 years, the architect just projected we'd have about $115 million. And if it's over $1 billion to do Rayburn, even pieces at a time, we're really going to have to step up the amount of funds that we bank, because you just questioned the $62 million that we're going to have to appropriate separately from what's in the trust fund every year until it's done. And that was why we envisioned the trust fund, because when we went through finishing the CVC, not in the CVC, but when we went through finishing the CVC, there were insane cost overruns, and it took so much longer than was projected because we're dealing with older buildings. So there's absolutely, even if these projects go swimmingly well, and this one appears to have done so, there's cost overruns, and there are change orders, and it takes longer than you expect, because once they get behind those walls in old buildings, they find things that they didn't expect because they don't know they're back there. So I would just strongly, while I appreciate that we put at least $10 million in FY18, we really need to seriously take a look at and consult with the architect on realistically what we are going to need to bank, so that we aren't this is a little bill, and so the percentage, this is the smallest bill, and, these projects can consume, almost, a tremendous percentage of our overall budget, and then we don't want to be in a situation where we're shortchanging the other needs that we have in the legislative branch. So I just wanted to make that point. And then if I can just ask the architect one additional question. Last year we had an AOC employee, Matt McClanahan, tragically pass away after a large tree fell on him. May he rest in peace. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Ayers, does the AOC have a process for identifying problem physical elements on the Capitol grounds? And did you conduct a review of this tragic incident? And what recommendations, if any, came from that review? And how are you working towards implementing those recommendations?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we did conduct a complete review of that incident and issued a report on that. And we worked closely with the Office of Compliance, hand in glove along the way. I'm sure they will issue a report soon as well on that. Our report gave us 6 recommendations. I've seen a draft of the Office of Compliance report. There's another 4 recommendations. Many of them overlap. Essentially, it comes down to having a good process where you evaluate all of those assets every single year. You document that, and that's not something that we were doing a good job at then. We have since rectified that. We've also, I'd say, raised our standards or lowered our standards. Today, we don't allow any high-hazard tree anywhere on Capitol grounds to remain, and we'll take that down. In the past, we may have had some high-hazard trees that were not in public areas that we might keep on and try to keep alive for a period of time. So we've changed our standards a bit. Another one of the important elements was to make some changes to ensure the long-term health of the trees on the Capitol campus by not doing any construction or having events that are under the trees. Doing that's compacts the soil under the trees and is detrimental to their health. So we've made changes there and are working with people like Capitol Concerts that are incredibly agile in what they do, and they're working with us to remove some of their infrastructure from under the trees at various events. They thought we were a little light on resources, so you'll see an arborist and an urban forester request in our 2019 budget that will bring us from 6 certified arborists up to 8 certified arborists. That was about it.
Do you mind if I ask one more tiny question, then I'm done? Just to follow up on what Ms. McCollum was asking you about the garbage pails. So it used to be, my office is in Longworth, it used to be that the recycling bin that took plastic had an orange bag in it. And so you knew the orange bagged bin was where you placed your recyclables, your recycled plastic. And then there was the paper bin, everything else was a paper bin. Now, for some reason, at least in my office, every one of those recycling bins has an orange plastic bag. So, yeah, in our office, and I don't know if I'm the only one in Longworth, but they all have orange plastic bags. So there's no, I mean, I don't know whether we don't know whether we can mix all the recyclables, paper and plastic, or you still need to put plastic in one and paper in the other. But I assume you don't know why that change was made?
I don't know why that change was made, but
And if there could be some more clear direction on what we do with our recyclables, if all the black bags are orange, then that would be helpful.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Amadei.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Are there any questions that would be particularly irritating that somebody's already asked that I can ask again since I'm the last one here? I'd be happy to do that at this time.
Pretty much everything, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so the only thing I would add is to thank you for the fact that you've been more than forthcoming in terms of making your different folks available for getting familiar with what's going on. Warn the yard work people that I'll probably want to do another lap this year.
Excellent.
Whoever's in charge of the weather does a better job than they've been doing so far this year. And other than that, we might want to talk with you about what you're doing with that wood after you cut it down on those hazard trees. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone have any further questions on this side of the aisle? Well, I think at that, Mr. Architect, we're going to give you a reprieve and allow you to get back
Thank
to
you.
work. I appreciate your appearance today. We'll continue to work with you as we proceed with this year's budget process. The subcommittee stands in recess until tomorrow, April 17th at 10 a.m., at which time we will receive testimony from members of Congress and outside witnesses. Meeting adjourned.